Halloween 2015. Halloween night started with myself and my buddy getting ready, putting on our costumes at my buddy's house. For the sake of privacy, I will refer to him as Brad. Brad and I were invited to a party by the girl he was dating. I was going dressed as a dead construction worker, while Brad dressed up as Maverick from Top Gun. We both looked pretty dumb, as we didn't put much effort into our costumes. He was excited about seeing the girl he had just started dating, and I was equally excited to see and flirt with some chicks that night. Once we were both ready to go, we headed out. Brad's new girl sent us a text with the address attached, and we GPS'd it. Brad drove us both to the party, which was about 30 miles away, on the outskirts of our city, out in the country. We drove down a very long, dark street with no street lamps and eventually made it to the house. The house was at the end of a long driveway, and when we pulled up, we saw a good number of cars and trucks parked out front. I'd say about 20. We were both pretty psyched, as this party looked to be awesome. Music was blaring from inside. The outside of the house was lit up with black lights and decorated with Halloween stuff, and red light was pouring out of the windows from inside. This place was a 2-story. It was very nice. It was surrounded by acres of farmland. There was not another house in sight. When we went inside, we found Brad's girl sitting on a couch in the living room, talking to 2 other people. We sat down, and Brad's girl said hello and came over to us, sitting next to Brad. She was dressed as a vampire. The 2 people she was talking to were wearing masks, one of them a guy, the other a girl. The girl was wearing a ghost face mask, and the guy was wearing just a mask with normal clothes. His mask was one of those black, blank face masks. We all talked for a while, with people rushing around us, dancing, and getting hammered. The guy was quiet. He only spoke when somebody spoke to him. I thought he was a little weird and creepy, and it didn't seem like he was having much fun. We assumed that the 2 had come together, but found out that the ghost face girl had come with 2 other girls, and the guy said he had come with his friend but couldn't find him now. After a couple hours of talking, laughing, and drinking, my vision was starting to get blurry, and I was getting pretty damn drunk. Brad and his girl had gotten off the couch and walked off somewhere, and the other 2 were still talking to each other on the couch next to me. They seemed to be flirting and having fun. At this point, I was people watching and sipping on my 5th mixed drink, Jack and Coke. I noticed that the blank face guy kept leaning his head back, and I'm pretty sure he was looking upstairs at the bedroom doors. I couldn't tell, because with his mask I couldn't see his eyes. The ghost face girl didn't seem to notice this. She was all over him and talking his ear off. At some point, I positioned one of the couch pillows behind my head and started to drift off to sleep. Going in and out of consciousness, I woke up for a moment completely and looked around the room. Shit was spinning at this point, and there was less people walking around. Way less. I pulled my phone out and checked the time. It was 3:45 a.m. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and leaned my head back on the pillow. I started closing my eyes, but right before I did, I noticed that the blank face guy was now leading the ghost face girl up the stairs. Her head was down, and she looked like she was barely awake and drunk as hell. He was helping her walk up the steps, and then they disappeared into a bedroom. The next thing I knew, Brad was shaking me and telling me that he wanted to leave. I asked if he was cool to drive, and he assured me he was. I got to my feet, and the room spun. I felt like I was going to puke right there, but I managed to make it outside. The sun had just gone up when we made it back to Brad's house, and we both collapsed on his couches and passed out. Hours later, I awoke to Brad's sister waking him up and questioning him. She asked if we had gone to that party out in the country, and he said yes. She was frantic and said that somebody was killed there last night. I was now completely awake upon hearing this, and so was Brad. I sat there silent, and Brad was asking who it was, what had happened. His sister said that she didn't know the girl's name yet, but that she was found murdered in an upstairs bedroom. She had been stabbed. I thought to myself, no way. Sure enough, to my disbelief, later on that day, they showed the girl that was killed, and it was the Ghostface girl. She was stabbed 36 times. The police questioned everybody who was at the party on Halloween, including Brad and I. Of course, I was very quick to tell them about the guy that brought her upstairs, and that he was wearing blue jeans, a black t-shirt, and a black blank face mask. To my knowledge, they never found that guy, and the person who threw the party said she never invited or saw the guy wearing a black blank face mask.
This horrifying encounter happened on Halloween in 2005. I was taking my daughter trick-or-treating around our neighbourhood at around 8:30, when most of the other trick-or-treaters were out as well. We were going from house to house, filling up her pillowcase, when we decided to make a turn and go far up the street we hadn't gone down before. There were parents, kids and teens all over the place, and they all seemed to be attracted to a certain house down the street. The house was relatively far, but so well decorated with Halloween stuff, we could tell from a distance that it was a haunted house. My daughter was 10 at the time, and got really excited when she saw it, so I told her I'd take her down there. We hit a few houses on the way, but she was so excited to get to the haunted house that we ended up skipping most of the other houses on the way. We finally reached the house. It was a single-story home, painted white, with no cars in the driveway, and had black tarps taped onto two 10-foot ladders that extended down the driveway and created a tunnel. There were fake spiderwebs all over the house and tunnel, and skeletons and zombies and such laying around the front yard. We walked into the tunnel, and it led all the way into the house. The tunnel was very well made, with smoke machines creating a very creepy effect as you walked through it. Whoever set this up also had scary music playing throughout the house. The tunnel ended when you reached the inside of the house. My daughter was in front of me. She eagerly and quickly walked into the house. When we first walked in, the living room was set up in a normal fashion, but with fake skeletons sitting on the couch, with their heads positioned to look at whoever entered through the tunnel. My daughter acted scared and laughed as she walked into the next portion of the haunted house. It was another tunnel to the right, which I guess led into a dining room. People were rushing by, mostly teenagers. I lingered for 10 seconds and then walked into the same tunnel as my daughter. As soon as I did, I saw that she was gone. I figured she must have ran through it. I hurried down the tunnel, and it indeed ended in the dining room. A mummy was sitting on the table, along with a vampire and a werewolf decoration. My daughter was not there. I again hurried through into the next black tarp tunnel. Smoke was everywhere in this place. He must have had like 5 machines going at once. I walked at a fast pace through the third tunnel and found myself back outside. The third tunnel led you through the front door. I looked around but didn't see her. I walked out to the street and looked around again. My daughter wasn't there. Kids and teenagers were all over the place, but my daughter was dressed as a pink rabbit this year and stuck out like a sore thumb. I called her name. After not hearing a reply, I started to panic a bit and thought she must have gone back in for a second time. I walked over to the first tunnel entrance and went through very fast. I got to the living room and called her name again, but louder, as I was getting worried and impatient. Just after I did that, I heard her say, "No!" from somewhere in the house. It sounded like it came from the first or second tunnel, so I walked back into it and called her name again. This time I heard her say, "Daddy!" Her voice sounded like somebody had cut it off, but I heard it right next to me. I felt through the tarp and my hand gripped a doorknob. Right at this spot in the tarp broke into two pieces and had tape holding them together. I pulled them apart and opened the bedroom door in front of me. The room was dark, but I could still see an older man and a teenage boy were holding my daughter by the arms, and the teen was covering her mouth. I didn't expect to see this. I walked into the room and said, "What the hell? Let her go now!" They did immediately, and she ran into my arms. I told her to run out into the street. She did, now crying, and I looked the older man in the eyes. He gave me a very, very bad feeling. His eyes were sinister. I said to them, "Don't ever touch her again. I'm calling the police right now, you sick bastards. Is this your house? Don't move." I called the cops and told them these two assholes had just put their hands on my daughter and were trying to hold her against her will in their house. I walked outside and looked at the house address. I gave it to the cops and walked back inside to find the man and the teen gone. Two cops drove up to the haunted house. Together, we all walked back into the house, demanding to speak with the homeowner. After about 30 minutes of asking people who lived there, finally we found a woman who claimed the house, and all the decorations were hers. We asked about the two guys, and she seemed genuinely puzzled and disturbed by what we told her. She said just her and her two daughters, both teenagers, lived there. The older man and teenager were never located.
This story happened to my best friend and I when we were 16 years old on Halloween night. It happened at my parents' house, which they still live in. Their house is in a very nice neighborhood, and it has a driveway that stretches very long, about a quarter mile down to the street. My parents were gone on this particular Halloween, and my buddy and I were just watching scary movies and playing video games. My parents had bought several huge bags of candy for the kids who came by trick-or-treating. There were a lot of other houses on their street, and they knew of a lot of kids who would be coming by. The night was passing. We were playing games, watching movies, and realized at about 9:30 that not a single trick-or-treater had come by yet. We thought that was strange and went out to the front porch to see if we could spot any trick-or-treaters. The street was far off, and I couldn't see anybody. We decided to walk up the driveway and look down the street to see if there were any kids on their way. We began walking and kicking rocks. About halfway up the driveway, we spotted something. There was somebody sitting in the driveway, at the beginning of the driveway right next to the street. He was sitting in a chair. We stopped walking and looked at this person. We were pretty sure that they were facing the street and could not see us. The person appeared to be a man with long brown hair slicked back that fell over his shoulders. We were tripping out over this because why in the hell would somebody be sitting in a chair in our driveway? At first, we planned on going back to the house, as this was creepy as hell. We were just gonna call my parents, but curiosity grew too much, and we decided to approach the man. We started slowly walking again down the driveway, and walked even slower the closer that we got. We eventually reached the man sitting in a chair. My buddy and I looked at each other, as if to figure out who was going to say something to him. I turned back to the man and said, hello? The man turned his head to the left slowly and said, "If you take another step, I will kill you." He then got up and started moving toward us, but we had bolted as soon as he said those words. Rocks were being kicked up as we sprinted back to my front porch, and we reached the front door. I looked down the driveway before we slammed the front door, and for the briefest of seconds, I saw the man was now halfway down the driveway and looking towards the front porch. We locked the deadbolt and chain. We ran over to the kitchen phone and dialed my father. It took my parents about an hour to get home from the party they were at, and my buddy and I were scared shitless the whole time. We locked every window and were hiding in my dad's office until they arrived. To our surprise, they came into the house with a police officer. Apparently, the man sitting in the chair was a disgruntled employee that my father had just let go earlier that day, and he was waiting for him to come home. What was he planning on doing? Who knows? No wonder we didn't see any trick-or-treaters on Halloween that night. They were scared off by the man sitting in the chair.
Hello. This happened to my sister 2 years ago on Halloween. She was home alone. Our parents were at my uncle's house and I was out with one of my friends. She said she was watching Hocus Pocus when, at around midnight, the doorbell rang. She thought to herself that that was a little odd, as she hadn't heard a knock or ring for at least 2 hours now. She assumed all the trick-or-treaters were done for the night. She had the bowl of candy on the sofa next to her and saw that there were a few Milky Ways and Butterfingers left. She got up, grabbed the bowl and went and opened the door. She said that a little boy, probably no more than 11 or 12, was standing there with a leather face costume on, mask and all. She said to the boy, "It's so late. Your parents are cool with you trick-or-treating right now." Now, this is where shit gets weird. She said that the boy didn't respond and just stood there like a statue, looking at her. She could see his eyes under his mask, and he was just standing still, staring at her. She gave out a fake laugh and held out the bowl for the boy. The boy didn't reach out and take any candy, and that's when she realized he didn't even have a bag or bucket to collect any candy. She then said to him, "What are you doing? Where's your bucket?" The boy again ignored her. She then said, "Okay," and then closed the door. After that, she told me she looked through the peephole in the door and saw that the boy was still standing there. Then, from right out of a nightmare, began rapidly shaking his head from left to right, like you would when trying to say no to something. Then he stopped and just stood there again. My sister continued watching through the peephole and says that the boy stood on our porch for at least 10 minutes, not moving or saying anything. Then abruptly ran off our porch and disappeared out of sight.